In a house this beautiful, it was easy to mistake the screaming for silence. The porcelain vase hit the marble floor at exactly 2:47 in the afternoon. Not because it slipped, not because a hand trembled, but because it was thrown. The shards scattered like teeth across the cold white stone, and Grace Anaya dropped to her knees to collect them before the pieces could reach the hallway where her 3-year-old son was napping. Her fingers moved quickly. Too quickly. A shard sliced across the pad of her right index finger, and blood bloomed in a thin red line. But she didn't flinch. She had stopped flinching 2 months ago. Flinching only made Vanessa linger. The heels clicked away down the corridor. Sharp, deliberate, satisfied. And then there was nothing but the sound of Grace's own breathing, and somewhere down the hall the small, sleepy voice of her son. "Mama?" Grace closed her eyes, pressed the bleeding finger against her apron, breathed. "I'm right here, baby. Go back to sleep." Silence returned, but it wasn't peace. In this house, silence was just the space between storms. The Caldwell estate sat on 14 acres of manicured grounds, just outside Greenwich, Connecticut, a limestone monument to ambition, taste, and the particular loneliness that money builds around people who have too much of it, and no one honest enough to say so. Ethan Caldwell had built every square foot of it from nothing. Not from family money, not from inheritance, not from the kind of quiet wealth that passes between generations like a secret handshake. His mother, Miriam, had cleaned offices, 3 buildings, 6 nights a week for 11 years. And Ethan had grown up falling asleep on a pile of her coat in the corner of a corporate lobby while she mopped floors that would never know her name. Now he was 34. Now his name was on buildings. And somehow, in the accumulation of all that distance between who he had been and who he had become, he had stopped seeing the people who stood closest to him. He came through the front door that Tuesday morning carrying a leather briefcase and the particular energy of a man whose meetings had ended early. The house smelled like fresh coffee and lemon polish, Grace's signature. She kept the estate running like a quiet engine, every surface gleaming, every detail anticipated, her presence so seamless that it was almost invisible. Almost. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell." Grace stood near the kitchen entrance, hands folded, a tray of coffee already prepared. She was 29, with dark hair pulled into a low knot, and the kind of steady, watchful eyes that missed nothing and revealed less. "Grace." Ethan smiled. Genuinely. The way he always did when he saw her. "You're a mind reader." "I was dreaming about this coffee somewhere over the Tappan Zee. Just good timing," she said. He picked up the cup, took a sip, and nodded toward the hallway. "How's Liam?" "Daycare still closed on Tuesdays. Pipe burst in the building last week. They're still repairing. He's welcome any time. You know that. This house has more empty rooms than a hotel." Grace allowed herself a small smile. "He's drawing in the laundry room. Keeps himself busy. Kids. Going to be an artist." Ethan said it warmly, then paused. Something crossed his face. A flicker of attention, barely perceptible. "You look tired, Grace. Everything okay?" The question sat between them like a door she could have opened. "I'm fine, Mr. Caldwell. Just a long week." He nodded. He believed her. He always believed her. That was the problem. Vanessa Hartwell appeared 12 minutes later, descending the staircase in a cream silk robe, her blonde hair cascading in the kind of effortless waves that required 45 minutes and 3 products to achieve. She was 31, striking, and possessed a smile that could make a person feel like the most important human being in any room, or the least. It depended entirely on who was watching. "You're home early." She kissed Ethan on the cheek, and her hand lingered on his chest. "I missed you. Couldn't stay away." They sat for breakfast. Poached eggs, fresh fruit, the kind of meal that looked like a magazine spread. Vanessa laughed at Ethan's story about a nervous investor in Singapore. She touched his hand across the table. She performed warmth, with the fluency of someone who had studied it, like a language. And then Ethan excused himself to take a call in his office. The moment he left the room, Vanessa's face changed. It didn't twist or contort. It simply emptied. The warmth drained out like water from a cracked glass, and what remained was something flat, appraising, and cold. She looked at the doorway where Grace had been standing, watching, waiting to clear plates. Grace had seen this transformation before. She had catalogued it, the exact half-second it took for Vanessa's public self to dissolve into her private one. She had learned that the space between those two versions was where the danger lived. Vanessa said nothing. She simply picked up a glass of sparkling water, took a sip, and set it back down with a click that sounded, to Grace, like a warning. The cruelty had a rhythm. It had started small. 3 months into Vanessa's residency at the estate, shortly after the engagement was announced. A comment here, a correction there. The particular tone of voice that powerful people use when they want someone to feel small without leaving evidence. You missed a spot on the counter, Grace. I thought you were supposed to be professional. Is this how you folded towels at your last position? I'm surprised they kept you. Ethan says you're wonderful. I wonder what he'd think if he saw your actual work. Then the comments became instructions. Then the instructions became demands. Then the demands came with consequences. By month 4, Vanessa had begun timing Grace's tasks, standing in doorways with her phone, watching, counting. If Grace took longer than Vanessa deemed acceptable, there were penalties, extra duties, revoked break times. Once, Vanessa called Grace back to re-clean a bathroom at 11 o'clock at night because she claimed she had found a water spot on the faucet. There was no water spot. Grace checked, but she cleaned the faucet anyway, because the alternative was a conversation she couldn't afford to have. By month 5, the cruelty became physical, not dramatic, not the kind that leaves the marks people look for, the kind that lives in the spaces between. A wrist gripped too hard during an instruction, a shoulder shoved while passing in a narrow corridor, a dish placed deliberately into Grace's hands at a temperature just high enough to burn, followed by, careful, don't be clumsy. Grace endured it. She endured it because her husband Daniel had died 18 months ago, when a scaffolding beam collapsed at a construction site in Bridgeport, and the medical bills from the 6 days he spent in the ICU before his heart stopped had consumed every dollar of savings they'd built together. She endured it because her son needed shoes and food and stability. She endured it because she had learned, through the particular education of grief and poverty, that survival often looks like silence. But survival was getting harder to maintain. Have you ever had to stay somewhere that was hurting you just because leaving felt impossible? If you have, then you already understand Grace, and you're not alone. Drop a comment below and tell me, because this story isn't just hers. The worst day before the worst day happened on a Thursday. Liam was in the laundry room, sitting on the floor with his crayons, drawing with the furious concentration that only 3-year-olds possess. Grace was in the kitchen, preparing the evening's place settings, when Vanessa appeared in the doorway. The Waterford glasses, Grace, not the everyday ones. We're entertaining on Saturday. Yes, Mum. I'll set them out. You'll set them out now. Grace moved to the cabinet. Behind her, she heard Vanessa step closer. Not the sound of someone crossing a room, but the sound of someone closing a distance. I saw Ethan's phone this morning, Vanessa said. Her voice was conversational, almost friendly. That was always the most dangerous register. He texted you about the kitchen renovation crew. He asked me to coordinate the schedule, yes. He texted you. Not me. About our home. Grace turned slowly, a crystal glass in each hand. It was a household logistics question, Ma'am. That's part of my role. Vanessa stepped forward and took one of the glasses from Grace's hand. Not roughly, but with a precision that made the gesture feel like a claim. She examined it, turned it in the light, and set it down on the counter. Let me be clear about something, Grace. Her voice dropped. You work here. You clean here. You exist in this house because I allow it. If I ever sense, even once, that you are becoming more to Ethan than the help, I will make sure you never work in a household like this again. I will make sure every agency in the tri-state area knows that you stole from us. And your son will grow up knowing his mother was a thief." The words landed like stones, dropped into still water. Grace stood perfectly still. Her hands did not shake. She had trained them not to. But inside her chest, something she had been holding together for months developed a crack so deep she could feel it spreading. "Do we understand each other?" "Yes, ma'am." Vanessa smiled. And in that smile, Grace saw everything. The insecurity, the jealousy, the particular cruelty of someone who needed to diminish others to feel substantial. Then Vanessa turned and walked away. And Grace set the second glass down on the counter with hands that remained steady through sheer force of will. She didn't cry. She had stopped allowing herself to cry in this house. But when she went to the laundry room, 10 minutes later, Liam looked up at her with eyes that were too serious for a 3-year-old, and he said, "The lady was mean again, Mama." Grace knelt down, pulled him against her, held him so tightly that he squirmed. "I know, baby, but it's going to be okay." She didn't believe it, but she said it, because mothers build shelters out of words when they have nothing else to build with. That night, after Liam fell asleep in the small staff quarters adjacent to the East Wing, Grace opened her laptop and searched for housekeeping positions. Every listing required references. Her primary reference was this household. She closed the laptop, opened it, closed it again. On the nightstand beside the bed, there was a photograph of Daniel, taken 2 summers before his death, at a beach in Rhode Island. His face turned toward the camera with the kind of grin that made you believe the world was simpler than it was. "Grace, you were named right," he used to say. "Don't let anyone take that from you." She pressed her thumb against the edge of the frame. "I'm trying, Danny," she whispered. "I'm trying." Doug Reeves had worked private security for 23 years, 8 in the military, 6 for a diplomat, and 9 for Ethan Caldwell. He was 54, built like a man who had been large his entire life, and had simply decided to stay that way. And he possessed the particular gift of noticing everything while appearing to notice nothing. He had noticed Grace. Not romantically. Doug had a wife of 26 years and 3 grown daughters. He noticed Grace the way a man who had spent his career protecting people noticed someone who needed protecting. The wince when she reached for a high shelf, the long sleeves in warm weather, the way her posture changed, contracted, diminished, whenever Vanessa entered a room, the way Liam stared at Vanessa with the unblinking wariness of a child who had learned to be watchful. Doug didn't have authority to intervene. His role was a state security, not household management, and Grace hadn't asked for help, hadn't said a word, which in Doug's experience meant the situation was either nothing or everything. He approached her one morning in the staff corridor, speaking carefully, the way you speak to someone who has learned to distrust offers of help. "Grace, I want you to know something. If you ever need anything at all, you call me first, before anyone else. Understood?" Grace looked at him. Her expression was impossible to read. "Understood," she said. She didn't explain. He didn't push. But that afternoon, Doug opened a new document on his personal laptop and typed a header, "Incident Log, Caldwell Estate." Beneath it, he typed a date, a time, and 3 sentences describing what he had observed. He would continue this log for 11 weeks. Ethan's meeting in Manhattan ended at 1:15 p.m., 3 hours earlier than expected. The Grayson portfolio acquisition, which his team had projected, would require 2 full days of negotiation, closed in a single session when the opposing counsel accepted revised terms over lunch. Ethan stood on 6th Avenue in the unexpected sunlight of a free afternoon and felt something he hadn't felt in weeks: lightness. He had been carrying an unease he couldn't name, a low hum of something wrong in his own house that he kept dismissing, Because Vanessa smiled at him every morning, and the coffee was always ready, and Grace always said she was fine. Everyone was always fine, and he had stopped asking what fine actually meant. He passed a flower vendor on the corner of 53rd Street and stopped. The buckets were filled with loose-stemmed peonies, sunflowers, bunches of wildflowers that looked like they had been gathered from a field rather than arranged in a shop. His mother had loved flowers like these. Imperfect, unstructured, honest. He bought a bundle of white peonies and caught the 2:05 train home. Doug was at the gate when Ethan's car pulled through. His expression, when Ethan stepped out, was something Ethan would remember for years afterward. Not surprise exactly, but the look of a man who has been waiting for a moment he hoped would never come and knew always would. "You're back early," Doug said. "Good news. Deal closed fast." Ethan held up the flowers. "Where's Vanessa?" Doug paused. 1 beat. 2. Kitchen wing, I believe. Ethan headed inside. Doug followed at a distance that was, in retrospect, deliberate. The house was quiet, in the way that large houses are quiet, not silent, but layered, sounds muffled by distance and architecture. Ethan moved through the foyer, past the living room, toward the kitchen corridor, his footsteps softened by the hallway runner. He heard it before he saw it. Not screaming. Something worse. A voice, Vanessa's voice, stripped of every warm frequency he had ever associated with it, reduced to something low and clinical and vicious. "Pick it up. Pick it up now. On your knees. That's where you belong, isn't it? On your knees cleaning up after yourself like the nothing you are." Ethan stopped walking. His hand tightened around the flower stems. He rounded the corner into the kitchen corridor, and the scene assembled itself in front of him like a photograph developing in acid. Grace was on the floor. Not fallen. Forced. Vanessa had her wrist twisted behind her back, pushing her downward with a controlled, practiced pressure that spoke of repetition. A serving tray lay broken on the tile. The crash that had apparently started this. Shards of a ceramic dish scattered around Grace's knees. Grace was not crying. Her face was set in an expression Ethan had never seen on another human being. Not pain exactly, but the absence of surprise. The expression of someone for whom this moment was not an exception, but a pattern. She had learned, somewhere in the months of endurance, that crying made it last longer. And in the corner of the room, sitting perfectly still on a small wooden chair, was Liam. He was 3 years old. He was clutching a piece of paper, a crayon drawing, against his chest like a shield. His eyes were enormous, unblinking, and fixed on his mother with the terrible comprehension of a child who has seen too much too many times to pretend he hasn't. The flowers fell from Ethan's hand. "Vanessa." His voice came out wrong. Not the way he expected, not loud, not commanding, not any of the things a billionaire's voice is supposed to be when he discovers something unforgivable in his own home. It came out quiet, almost gentle. The way a voice sounds when something fundamental has just broken inside the person speaking. Vanessa released Grace's wrist, turned, and Ethan watched it happen in real time. The reconstruction. The mask reassembling itself over her features like a curtain being drawn across a window. Shock. Recovery. The first syllables of an explanation already forming. "Ethan. Oh my God, you're home early." She stepped back from Grace, her hands rising in a gesture that was meant to convey innocence. She dropped the entire tray, the serving dish, the one from the Amalfi set. "I was upset. I overreacted. I know how it looks, but she's been..." "Don't. One word." He said it the way you close a door you will never open again. Vanessa recalibrated. Her eyes softened. Her chin dropped slightly. Vulnerability. Performed with the skill of someone who had used it as currency her entire life. She moved toward him, hand reaching for his arm. I know. I lost my temper. It's been so stressful here while you've been traveling, and she's been difficult for months, And I didn't want to burden you with household problems when you have so much on your plate. Difficult, Ethan repeated. The word sat in his mouth, like something rotten. He looked past Vanessa to where Grace was pulling herself up from the floor, one hand braced against the counter, the other pressed against her own wrist. Grace. His voice changed, softened in a completely different way. Are you all right? Grace stood, straightened her apron, looked at Vanessa, looked at Ethan, and the standard answer rose in her throat like a reflex built from months of repetition, the automatic response of a woman who had learned that truth was a luxury she couldn't afford. I'm fine, Mr. Caldwell. Vanessa exhaled. The sound was barely perceptible, but Ethan heard it. Relief, arriving too soon, too certain, too practiced. And then Liam moved. He slid off the wooden chair with the unhurried determination of a child who has decided something. He didn't run. He walked, small sneakers on tile, the sound almost imperceptible, across the kitchen, past the broken tray, past Vanessa's heels, past his mother's trembling hands, and stopped directly in front of Ethan. He looked up. This was the man who had once crouched down to show him how to hold a crayon properly. This was the man who called him Buddy and asked about his drawings, and who smelled like coffee and something warm. This was, in the uncomplicated taxonomy of a 3-year-old's world, a safe person. Liam held up the drawing. Ethan crouched down, took it. The paper was wrinkled from being clutched so tightly. The crayon lines were thick and unsteady, the work of a hand still learning to control itself. But the image was unmistakable. 3 figures. One small, barely more than a circle with legs. One medium-sized on the ground, arms raised. One tall, standing over the medium figure with a scribble of yellow at the top. Yellow like hair. Yellow like Vanessa's hair. The small figure stood apart, watching. Liam pointed to the medium figure. Mama. He pointed to the tall figure with the yellow hair. He did not say a name. He said something worse. The mean lady. A pause. Then, with the devastating simplicity that only the very young are capable of, she does it a lot. The kitchen went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has weight. Ethan stared at the drawing. The crayon lines blurred slightly, and he realized his eyes were wet. She does it a lot, he said, very quietly. Not a question. Liam nodded. Solemn, certain, unburdened by the politics of adult self-preservation, incapable of the sophisticated architecture of a lie. When you not here. Behind him, Vanessa's voice sharpened. The warmth dropped away completely now, replaced by something brittle and hard. He's 3 years old, Ethan. He doesn't understand what He doesn't what? Ethan stood. The drawing was still in his hand. Lie? Children his age don't construct lies like this, Vanessa. They don't draw what they haven't seen. They don't know how to fabricate something this specific. He looked at the drawing again, then at Grace's wrist, already darkening, a bruise forming in the shape of fingers. But adults do. From the doorway, Doug's voice, low, steady, heavy with the weight of something carried too long in silence. There are others, Ethan, if you want to see them. Ethan turned. Others? I've been logging incidents for 11 weeks. Dates, times. What I observed through routine security monitoring. I didn't have authorization to act on it. I should have found a way to tell you sooner. Doug's jaw was tight. That's on me. Vanessa's voice pitched upward. The first crack in the performance. This is absurd. You're all conspiring against me. The security guard and the maid and a toddler. This is what you're going to believe over your own fiancée. Ethan looked at her. And in that look, Vanessa saw something she had never seen from him before. Not anger, not betrayal, not even disgust. Clarity. The terrifying, irreversible clarity of a man who has just realized that the person he loved was a construction. and that the construction has collapsed, and that there is nothing behind it. Everyone out, please. Except Grace and Liam. Doug nodded. Vanessa did not move. Ethan. Leave the room. Vanessa. She left. Her heels clicked down the corridor. The same sound they had made 100 times before when she walked away from Grace on the floor. But this time, they carried a different weight. The weight of finality. The kitchen was quiet. Grace stood by the counter, her injured wrist cradled against her stomach. Liam had returned to her side, his small hand wrapped around two of her fingers. Ethan stood across from them, the drawing still in his hand. "How long?" he asked. Grace looked at her son, looked at Ethan, and for the first time in 7 months, she told the truth. She told him about the comments, the timing, the late-night callbacks, the grip marks and the hot dishes, and the threats about her career, about Liam, about the fabricated theft that would follow her to every agency in the state. She told him in a steady, factual voice that was more devastating than tears, because it was the voice of someone who had organized her suffering into categories in order to survive it. Ethan listened, without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me?" Grace set down the cloth she had unconsciously picked up. Even now, even in this moment, her hands reached for work. "Because she told me she could destroy any chance I had of working again. Because I didn't know if you would believe me over her." She paused. The next words cost her something. "And because no one has ever asked me that question before. No one has ever made it feel safe to answer." Ethan absorbed this. The silence stretched. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of a man rearranging everything he thought he knew. "My mother cleaned offices," he said finally. 3 buildings, 6 nights a week, for 11 years. I used to fall asleep in the corner on a pile of her coat while she mopped floors. I built everything I have because of what she carried." He looked at his hands. Hands that signed contracts, shook powerful men's hands, held crystal glasses at fundraisers. "I should have seen this. I should have been paying attention." Grace looked at him with an expression that held no accusation, only recognition. "You're paying attention now. If you believe every child deserves to grow up knowing their parent is safe, share this story. It costs you nothing, but it might reach someone who needs it." Ethan met Vanessa in the study. Through the glass wall, the household staff could see their silhouettes, but hear nothing, which was, in its own way, more eloquent than any words. Vanessa cycled through strategies with the efficiency of someone who had been managing men her entire adult life. First came softness, the hand on his arm, the lowered eyes, the whispered, "I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me." When that failed, tears, real ones, or close enough. When those failed, reason. Every couple goes through difficult adjustments. I was trying to manage the household in your absence. When reason failed, bargaining. I'll apologize to her. Publicly. Whatever you need. And when bargaining failed, anger. The real Vanessa. The final layer. You're making a mistake. Do you understand that? You're throwing away everything we've built because of a maid and a child's scribble. Ethan stood by the window. He hadn't raised his voice once. "The ring stays on the mantle," he said. "My legal team will contact yours regarding the separation of any shared arrangements. You have until tomorrow morning to collect your personal belongings." "You can't do this." "I can. And I should have done it the moment I stopped asking myself why Grace flinched every time you walked into a room." Vanessa left the study. In the foyer, within earshot of Doug, of the kitchen staff, of the world she had tried to control, she turned and delivered her final line. "You're choosing a maid over me." Ethan stood in the study doorway. His voice was calm, tired, certain. "I'm choosing a person over a performance. There's a difference." The front door closed behind her. The house exhaled. He found Grace in the laundry room 40 minutes later. She was folding sheets. Of course she was folding sheets. Her hands needed the rhythm, the way other people needed a drink or a prayer. Grace, you don't have to do that right now. I know. She didn't stop. It helps me think. He sat on the bench by the folding table. This was new territory. He had never simply sat with her. Not like this. Not as two people in a room without the architecture of employer and employee between them. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, even if you think it'll make things complicated. Her hands slowed. All right. What do you need? Not what I think you need. Not what makes sense for the household. What do you need? Grace set down the sheet, looked at him. No one had asked her that question since Daniel died. Time, she said. I need time to stop being afraid when I hear heels on a marble floor. I need to sleep through the night without checking that the door is locked twice. And I need, she stopped, started again. I need Liam to draw pictures of things that make him happy instead of things that scare him. Ethan nodded slowly. Then that's what happens. Doug delivered the full incident log the following morning. 11 weeks, 37 entries, some accompanied by time-stamped security footage from the estate's interior cameras Vanessa had never thought to ask about. Ethan read every entry. When he reached the dates, he stopped breathing for a moment. He had been home for 9 of them. 9 documented incidents had occurred while he was somewhere in this house, 1 floor up, in his office on a call, reviewing contracts. 9 times Grace had been hurt or threatened while he sat in his study listening to nothing because he had stopped listening for anything. This was the hardest part of his reckoning. Not the grief of losing Vanessa. That relationship, he now understood, had been a negotiation he mistook for love. The hard part was the grief of his own blindness, the recognition that comfort had made him incurious, that he had built a house large enough to hide suffering in, and never once thought to walk through every room. He made calls. His legal team documented everything. Formal records were established. If Vanessa attempted to retaliate against Grace, professionally or personally, there would be a comprehensive time-stamped record of what had occurred in this house. But the paperwork was not the moment. The moment was Liam. 3 weeks passed. The mansion settled into a new rhythm, quieter. But the quality of the quiet had changed. It was no longer the held breath between storms. It was the particular stillness of a space that has been made safe again, tentatively, the way a room feels after you've finally opened the windows. Grace still worked at the estate. Ethan had offered her a revised contract, a significant raise, formal employment protections, and a clear written agreement that her position was unconditional and reported directly to him. She hadn't accepted immediately. She had taken 4 days to think about it, which Ethan respected more than he could express, because it meant she was choosing to stay rather than feeling trapped into staying. The difference mattered. The difference was everything. They had begun talking. Not the way an employer and employee talk, the efficient exchange of logistics and schedules, but the way 2 people talk when they have accidentally seen each other honestly and discovered that honesty, while terrifying, is also a kind of relief. He told her about Miriam, about the coat pile in the corner of the lobby, about the day he made his first million and drove to the cemetery where she was buried and sat in the car for 2 hours because he couldn't figure out what to say to a woman who would have been proud of him, but also would have asked, very gently, whether he was still paying attention to the right things. Grace told him about Daniel, about the beach in Rhode Island, about the way he used to say, "Grace, you were named right," with such conviction that she almost believed the world would always be that simple. He was right sometimes, she said one evening on the back terrace, the garden spreading out before them in the blue-grey light. Liam was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. And wrong sometimes. Wrong sometimes too. But I loved him for trying. A pause. Not awkward. Just honest. Grace, I want you to know something. Ethan chose his words carefully, not because he was uncertain of them, but because he understood that words, in Grace's experience, had been used as weapons, and he wanted his to arrive gently. Whatever you want your future to look like, whether it's here or somewhere else, I will make sure you have what you need to build it. That's not a condition. That's not attached to anything. It's just true. She looked at him. Why? Because you stayed when leaving would have been easier. Because you protected your son and kept your dignity even when someone was trying to strip you of both. Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten. What's that? That the most important things happening in a person's house aren't the things they're looking at. Grace held his gaze for a long moment, and then she smiled. Not the small, careful, professional smile he had seen every morning for 2 years. A real one. The kind that begins somewhere deeper than the face, and arrives slightly broken and entirely beautiful. It was the first real smile she had allowed herself in months. Ethan had kept Liam's first drawing, the one from the kitchen, the one with the 3 figures and the yellow-haired shape standing over the fallen one. He had not displayed it. He had placed it in his desk drawer, in a simple frame, where he would see it every time he reached for a pen. When Grace discovered this, she stood in the doorway of his office and looked at it for a long time. Why? To remind myself to pay attention, every single day, to what's actually happening in front of me, not what I want to believe is happening. Grace laughed. Softly, unexpectedly, a sound like something unlocking. He's going to want it back someday, you know. Then I'll owe him something better in exchange. He'll probably ask for a dog. Probably. The final morning arrived the way the best mornings do, without announcement, without drama, carrying nothing heavier than sunlight. Liam came thundering into the kitchen at 7:15 with the particular velocity of a 3-year-old who has slept well and woken with purpose. He was carrying a new drawing, his most ambitious yet, clutched in both hands, with the gravity of someone presenting a thesis. Mr. Effin, he announced. He had never quite mastered the th sound. Look what I drawed. Ethan, crouched down, took the paper. This drawing was different from the first one. Different in every way that mattered. The house was there, recognizable by its size, and the scribbled green around it that represented the grounds. A sun occupied the upper right corner, rendered in aggressive yellow spirals, and in the center stood 3 figures, one tall, one medium, one small, all upright, all together. No one on the ground, no one standing over anyone else. And beside them, slightly larger than anatomically plausible, was a 4th figure. 4 legs, a tail, what appeared to be a tongue extending approximately the length of its entire body. That's us, Liam announced with complete authority, pointing to the 3 human figures, then pointing to the quadruped, and that's our dog. Grace, pouring coffee at the counter, looked over. We don't have a dog, sweetheart. Liam looked at her with the unshakable certainty of someone who has seen the future and is simply waiting for the adults to catch up. Not yet. Ethan and Grace looked at each other over Liam's head. The look lasted only a moment, but in that moment there was something that neither of them tried to name, because naming it would have made it smaller than it was. It was not a declaration. It was not a promise. It was something more honest than either of those things. It was possibility, tentative and luminous, and arrived at through pain, the way the best possibilities always are. Ethan looked back at the drawing, at the sun in the corner, at the 4 figures standing together on ground that was solid and green. Not yet, he agreed. The story of Ethan Caldwell and Grace Anaya did not end with a grand gesture. It did not end with a kiss in the rain or a declaration from a rooftop or any of the architectures that people build around love to make it feel larger than life. It ended, or rather, it began, with a crayon drawing made by a 3-year-old boy who did not know that he had changed everything. He did not know that his first drawing, the dark one, the honest one, had broken open a lie that had been suffocating his mother for 7 months. He did not know that a billionaire kept that drawing in a desk drawer as a daily act of penance. He did not know that the truth, delivered in the only language he had, the mean lady, she does it a lot, when you're not here, had been the most powerful thing anyone said in that house all year. He was 3. He knew crayons. He knew his mother. He knew who was safe and who was not, and that was enough. Because this story was never about the cruelty that was uncovered. It was about the courage that was discovered underneath it. Not what was taken, but what was given back, freely, without strategy, without calculation, by a child who simply drew what he saw and trusted that someone would finally look. Some truths don't need volume. They don't need evidence files, or security footage, or legal teams. Sometimes the truest thing in the room is a piece of paper, a handful of crayons, and a small voice saying what every adult was too afraid to say. The mean lady. She does it a lot when you're not here. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. If this story stayed with you, then you already know why I tell these stories. Subscribe for more narratives that remind you what it means to be human, what it costs, what it's worth, and why the smallest voices often carry the biggest truths. New story every week. I'll see you in the next one.